And I think it's one of the major attack strategies of the evil one is to just try to get us to pack up and go home, be quiet, go away, settle for something less, stop dreaming, stop believing, in yourself and in what God's placed upon your heart. So just don't doubt, have faith, not just in God, but in God through you, that you can see this thing through. Just don't quit on it.
This is the L3 Leadership Podcast, episode number 179. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast. My name is Doug Smith, and I'm the founder of L3 Leadership. In this episode, you're going to get to hear part one of my interview with Shawn Lovejoy. Shawn is the founder and CEO of CourageToLead.com, a company that coaches leaders through what keeps them up at night. I love that tagline. In the interview, you're going to get to hear us talk about the importance of coaching and mentoring for leaders. You'll hear us talk about what Shawn believes is the one vital attribute of all leaders that God uses most. We talk about succession. Shawn actually handed off a church that he founded, and we talk about the process he used for that. We talk about his advice to young leaders and so much more. You're going to love this interview. And I would also encourage you can listen to our part two of our interview, which is our lightning round interview in episode number 180. I'd highly encourage you to listen to both. They're both full of wisdom. For ways to connect with Shawn and to learn more about what he's doing and links to everything that we discuss, you can check out the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 179. But before we dive into the interview, just a few announcements. First, I just want to encourage all of you to become members of L3 Leadership. Our vision here is very, very simple. We want to connect and develop leaders to help them maximize their potential. And we believe that every leader needs a community of leaders around them that will encourage them, challenge them, and hold them accountable. And that's exactly what we provide here at L3 Leadership. When you become a member, you'll have the ability to join one of our mastermind groups or launch your own. You'll have access to our community of over 100 leaders, and you'll have access to the tools and resources you need to take your life and leadership to the next level. To learn more about membership, go to l3leadership.org/membership. I also want to thank our sponsor, Alex Landon, who is a full-time realtor with Keller Williams Realty. If you're looking to buy or sell a house in the Pittsburgh market, Alex is your guy. He's a member and a supporter of L3 Leadership, and he'd love the opportunity to connect with you. You can find out more about Alex and connect with him at pittsburghpropertyshowcase.com. And lastly, I want to thank our other sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. My wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers, and we just think they're an incredible company. Not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. John gave Laura and I a book to help us prepare for our marriage, and he's been investing in me as a father, a husband, and a leader now for years. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with that being said, let's dive right into my interview with Shawn Lovejoy. Enjoy, and I'll be back at the end with a few announcements. Thank you so much, Shawn, for taking the time to do this interview. And why don't we just start off with you just telling us a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, so it's great to be on the call, first of all, today. And I appreciate what you do. And I think we go way back with John Maxwell. I go all the way back to cassette tapes. Okay, you probably don't remember cassette tapes, but I do. So I was listening to John Maxwell when he did cassette tapes.
That's amazing.
Did you ever listen to John on a cassette tape?
Maybe one, not many. Yeah. I didn't get the full binders. I was on the CDs were my thing. I actually still have binders in my car. Yep.
I still have CD binders on my shelves and in my closet. I don't have anything to play them on, but I have them. So I refer to myself as a spiritual entrepreneur, but I'm a leadership geek. And I was a real estate developer. God did revival in our church, called me into the vocational ministry out of that. Planted a church, became a mega church, started coaching pastors, sort of backed into, like Maxwell, coaching marketplace leaders, So today I lead a coaching ministry for both ministry and marketplace leaders called CourageToLead.com. We coach leaders through what keeps them up at night. That's what we talk about. That's our mission, and kind of talk guys and gals, off the ledge every day and provide permission and perspective for them.
I love that. And I'm just curious, so that's what you're doing today, but what do you wish people knew about your journey and what it took to get to where you are today that they may not know?
I think most people assume, that because you've been successful in the business world, you know how to, grow a church and lead a church, but that's not always true. There's a difference between being an entrepreneur and a leader. I think even our president right now is learning all of that. He's a brilliant entrepreneur, but he's learning that you just can't force your way, through everything, regardless of political persuasion. We've seen him struggle, through all of that. and understand the nuances of people and politics, and leadership is influence. So there's, so learning how to do that. I think a lot of people understand that pastors, because they went to seminary, know how to build and lead, an organization, which is, they don't teach that at all in seminary. They teach you how to exposit scripture, which is, 20% of your week, so 80% of your week as a pastor, you're ill prepared and equipped to face. And I found the same is true with entrepreneurs and leaders in the marketplace. They don't teach us how to do the things that we end up having to do every day, like conflict resolution. I think Conflict 101 ought to be the first class in college and any, graduate study, but they don't teach us this stuff, and people will always be the greatest tension, as a leader. So I learned this the hard way by reaching out to mentors and coaches, and had some amazing coaches in my life. And that's one of the reasons I believe in it so much.
That's amazing. Were there any key lessons along your journey that were wow moments for you that changed everything through those mentoring relationships, or has it just been consistent chiseling away at your growth?
Well, I think it was Zig Ziglar who first said it. It is the books you read and the people that you hang out with, determine, what you become. And I would have considered myself a non-reader going back to college and before, and developing that discipline and even passion for it, now in my own life. And then, the only reason I think I've been successful is I was too dumb to quit, number one. Number two, I sought out great, mentors. I walked up to Andy Stanley, pastor of North Point Community Church, when the church was running 1,200 people one Sunday after a service. And I was just, arrogant enough to ask him if I could take him to a cup of coffee. And he said yes. He ended up being just one of my mentors, coaches, for almost a decade. And I've had a dozen like him, that would, compete as far as platform is concerned, honestly, and I owe all my leadership, to great people. Either I've read and studied from afar, or I with as many of those as possible, I've fought to get in a relationship with, so that I can learn from the best, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah. So can you talk about, I was going to ask this later, but you've obviously developed a fantastic network. Anyone who's willing to go up to Andy Stanley, ask him for a cup of coffee is amazing. What are your top networking tips for people who want to build those kind of relationships or get in the door? I know you said you kind of had to fight your way through. What advice do you have for those looking to build their network?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. I get asked that, fairly regularly, by young leaders, like, how do you know all these people that you know? And the answer is really, really simple. I've worked at it. I've been intentional about it. In fact, in most of those relationships, they've been, largely one-sided, and I'm comfortable with that. Okay. I've invested more into the relationship, than I've received out of it. But I've received so much, of the intangible and the truths and the leadership nuggets, over time. But I have fought, to be outside my own organization, be outside my own tribe, my network, not to have people that just agree with me or come out of my own tribe or network. But I have fought to reach across the aisle and get to know leaders all over North America. And so it's put me in some amazing places, in some amazing offices, in some amazing relationships. So it just requires intentionality. Most of us get so busy, managing our thing and managing our lives. We don't take time, as part of our personal growth plan to work at intentional relationships with mentors and coaches. And I've done that, and I've reaped the rewards of that over time.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, do you think there's anything that you do that makes you stand out to make them want to give you an hour or 15 minutes at a cup of coffee? I'm sure for every 100 people that ask Andy Stanley for a cup of coffee, maybe, one gets it. I mean, I could be wrong. And I'm sure it's the same thing with you now. I'm sure tons of leaders want to meet with you and you can only say yes. Any tips on how you can make yourself stand out when trying to get a meeting with someone?
Yeah, I think so. I think, because I've experienced this some as young leaders have come to meet with me, nothing gets under my skin faster. When I have a young leader come to meet with me and pick my brain, and I offer them a cup of coffee, and they pour their coffee, and then they sit back and they cross their legs while I'm talking. I'm like, well, hopefully I'm going to say something profitable that you might want to write down.
Yeah.
So because that's the way I lived. Every time I approach one of these guys, I had, before smartphones, I had my journal, my notebook, and I'm writing furiously, everything that they're saying. So they feel valued. I mean, the greatest leader in the world feels valued if you're dropping your wisdom and experience, and the person is actually going, to lengths to write it down. And then secondly, if they told me 2 or 3 things to do or gave me suggestions, the first thing I did when I went back to the table next time was to say, hey, just so you know, they didn't have to ask me, just so you know, I had this conversation. I read these 2 books. I did this. I checked out this website. I called this marketing company, whatever it might be. You told me about this pastor. I've reached out to him. We have a coffee, and they're like, wow, maybe this was a good investment of my time. Yeah. Into this young leader. So I think the best silver and gold had I none, and you know what I'm talking about, to pay these guys what they were worth, but it was of great value to them and was good stewardship of their time if I executed and had conversations and made decisions based upon, what we talked about.
Yeah. That's so good. I want to go back to your journey for just a second. When we were talking before the interview started, you mentioned that I think 3 years ago, you transitioned from a church that you were leading that grew into a mega church. Can you just talk about transitions? I'm just curious what you learned from that. Was that hard? Did you find a lot of identity was in your church and it was hard to leave? I'm just curious, what advice do you have for leaders when it comes to transitions in life?
Yes, it was hard. Yes, it is hard. And they call it founder's disease in the marketplace, but it's true of ministry leaders as well. And I think there was a time in ministry life when, pastors sort of got a reputation for, changing churches every 18 to 24 months, but I actually think a leader can just as often, if not more often, hang on too long. And I was there almost 20 years, 17 years. And I told our church, I said, as hard as it is for me and you, for me to hand this baton off to another leader and walk away from this great thing, like it won't be easier for you as the church 10 more years from now. Because the tendency is, every few years that I remain the leader of this organization, it tends to get grafted around my personality. There's a reason why a lot of these political offices have term limits. Yeah. I almost wish that was true in the ministry marketplace, sometimes that we had to roll off, and some denominations like the Methodist Church may not, or even the Catholic Church may not have this too wrong, even though people hate it. But it keeps the organization from being built around a man and keeps it being formed around the mission. And that's what I sought to do. So a lot of people ask me, one, how I was able to transition, more easily than it seems like most people do. And it's because, like, I started preparing to leave in 2003. When I started coaching leaders in 2003, it was my exit strategy. And I worked that exit strategy over the next 13 years. So by the time I got ready to transition, it was a small step for me. And honestly, it was a pretty small step for the church. I wasn't teaching more than about 60% of the time, 55 to 60% of the time. We had a teaching team that was 3 or 4 deep. We had live teaching at our campuses. So, I worked hard those last 7 or 8 years in particular, not to build this thing around, a personality or a position or person, but to build it around a mission, not a man. And it's worked out.
Yeah. So I'm sure some of these things you mentioned already. I'm just curious what your advice would be, because I know a ton of leaders right now that are getting ready to hand off to the next generation. I've seen some do it well, some not do it well. What advice do you have? I know you talked about building a team. Did you hand it off to an individual? I know Bill Hybels just handed off and there's 2 leaders of the organization. I'm just curious, what advice do you have for people who are thinking transition, even if it's 10 years away?
Yeah, so I think authority, an authority structure is important. I think accountability is important. At the end of the day, there's no perfect way to do it. I think that the great tension that everybody feels, that my staff felt, the church, felt, great young leader took over from me, but he's different from me. And he doesn't process information, make decisions the way I do. So there's always going to be some speed bumps, along the way. And there have been with us. But to God be the glory, the church is still going strong, and thank God for that. I think the main thing a leader needs to recognize, and I say this in my book, Be Mean About the Vision, every leader is an interim leader.
Hmm.
Every leader is an interim leader. So it's not if we're going to leave, it's how and when we're going to leave. We're going to leave either when everybody wants us to leave or nobody wants us to leave. I chose to leave when no one wanted me to leave, and then we've got to leave. So what is that going to look like? Do we have an exit strategy? And I think that's years and years and years before we leave, beginning to put that in place. I have leaders now call me all the time who are thinking about transitioning out of their churches. Hey, I'm looking at retiring next year. When should I start sort of thinking about my transition? A decade ago?
Yeah.
A decade ago. You should. So if you're 8 to 10 years away, start building what you're going to do. Start working. Start experimenting. You fail your way forward as an entrepreneur. So what does it look like for you to create value proposition out there in the future and give it a shot?
That's so good. So back to your leadership and coaching. I love your tagline, by the way. You coach leaders through what keeps them up at night. And you've been doing this since 2003. And I'm just curious, what patterns do you consistently see emerge of what keeps leaders up at night? Are there, 2 or 3 things where I know you talked about relationships and people before, but what are those top things?
Yeah, so it's always 3 tensions or opportunities. It's always these are the irreducible minimums, if you will. The things that keep us awake at night. It's either team, which is almost always number one. It's the people element. That one of the biggest lies from hell ever believed, this, Doug, is that one more staff person would solve our problem. And then you realize every staff person is a problem, because they're sinners and they have personalities, and it's more complex the more people you add, and the more sleep you'll tend to lose, and the more fires you have to put out. All of that, the more organizational structure tweaks you'll have to make. So it's team, that's number one tension, and opportunity. That's the reason why a lot of organizations, stagnate, because they don't build a team around them, and then it's culture. How do I, craft out my vision, my values? Then how do I close the gap between my beliefs and behaviors? How do I get everyone pulling in the same direction? How do I protect the vision from what I call vision hijackers? All of that along the way. It's all those culture nuances. How do we make this the best day, of people's week? Or how do we make 8 to 5, the work day, the best part of people's day? How do we create raving fans? How do we create a life-giving culture? All those things. And then it's systems. My definition of a system is just a bridge that moves things and people from where they are to where they need to be, or from where they are to where God wants them to be. So it's budgets, it's meetings, it's communication, it's assimilation, it's all of those things. We've got to constantly build those simple steps that allows people to cross the bridge. So it's those 3 irreducible minimum tensions that I see leaders, and of course I've got to be the culture I want to build. So if I'm not healthy, I only had to fire 3 people. I had some that fired themselves, and I was thankful for God they took care of it. But I had to fire 3 people in 20 years of leadership up to now. All 3 of those had to do with emotional intelligence. They had to do with leadership health and relational, IQ, and all of that, and integrity, character stuff. Had nothing to do with their competence. Had everything to do with their character. And so, we end up backing into a lot of personal life coaching with both ministry and marketplace leaders, and that well.
That's good. So can you talk to leaders just out there on why it's important for them to get coaching? I'm sure there's a lot of people hesitant saying, I don't need a coach. I don't have time for a coach. I'm swamped in everything else I'm doing. Why is it important to get coaching? And then maybe follow that up with, the services that you provide. And maybe if someone listening to this and could use your services, how can they get connected?
Yeah. So I just, if this is not in the Bible, it probably should be. I do think coaching is biblical. Proverbs 19:20 says, get all the advice and instruction you can so you'll be wise the rest of your life. Proverbs 20:18, plans succeed through good counsel. Do not go to war without wise advice. So what we're really talking about is not just talking to a buddy or a friend or even a mentor. We're talking about having a coach, having somebody who, we can call. It's a dial a friend, but frankly, we have skin in the game in that relationship that can help us become and do. I think coaching protects us. We all have blind spots. In my live events and coaching networks and cohorts, I'll often ask for a show of hands. How many of you guys know what your blind spots are? And they'll raise, a few will inevitably raise their hands. Then I'll finish by saying, no, you don't. The very idea that they're blind spots, means you're blind to them. You don't know what they are. Once you've discovered them, they're just sins in your life. Okay? Nice. So I think coaching protects us, because it helps us sort of reveal our blind spots. Rearview mirrors help protect us from backing into things and running over things and people, and a coach can provide that for us. I think coaching gives permission. A lot of intuitive leaders that we work with, they have a good sense of what needs to be done. The conversations need to be had, whatever. They just need to hear someone say, you're not crazy. You can do that. You're right. They're not going to make it. You need to hear that today. I think, coaching provides encouragement and inspiration. There were many, many days in my life and ministry where I've just about been ready to quit, jump off of something, maybe kill somebody. And it's my coach that's, quote, talk me off the ledge. And I came away from every single coaching conversation I ever had encouraged. I can't say that about a conference. I mean, there have been times when I came away inspired. There are times when I come away condemned, because I can't possibly do what they do or whatever. But every coaching conversation I've ever had, I came away encouraged, and I think coaching challenges us. I think we all need to be challenged. I think we need accountability. I think all of us, whether admit it or not, we're naturally lazy. We will always want to do the easy thing. We want to microwave the oatmeal if at all possible. So if you want a crisis at our house, my microwave went out a few months ago, and it was crisis for all 5 members of my family. Crisis, okay? And we had to go back to putting things on the stove, God forbid, warming them up. And then we're reminded that people lived this way hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, so they were fine. So we want to microwave everything. And the truth is, like, we need someone to help us not be so lazy and hold us accountable, along the way. And then I think just isolation and loneliness. I think coaching confronts, both of those. I think most leaders are lonely. Most of us don't have close friends. And just to be able to have a safe person to talk things through with helps us feel like we're not alone, and have somebody else say, yeah, I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, got the scars to prove it. And let me tell you how I got through that. And that's what it's done for me. And it's what we try to provide for leaders.
I love that. So if someone's listening to this, can you talk about the services you provide or how to get connected with your network at Courage to Lead?
Yeah, so the lion's share of what we do is one-on-one coaching. I mean, that's what we love to do. We have some other offerings, but our goal always is to be a one-on-one relationship with, the people we work with. At the time of this recording, we have almost 20 coaches all over North America, and a lot of these guys and gals are people that I've coached or spent time with, invested into, and equipped as coaches. And we have a model, the personal gears of growth and the organizational gears of growth. But as much as anything, we're talking about wisdom, and we're talking about health. So when you get a coach with us, you get somebody's cell phone number, and you can call and text, email, and you're going to get to talk to them that day. We're going to sit down with you every month, whether it's virtual or on-site or some combination there between. And then we want to be with you, 6, 12 months. We want to spend some time with you. We're not consultants. What some are calling coaching is really training. What some are calling coaching is really content delivery. And I'm not against that. I just don't think that's coaching. I think coaching requires a relationship over time. I watch you practice and play, and I give you instant feedback. And that's what we try to provide, to the people that we're working with.
I love that. And they can check all this out. And I think, did I see they can get a free consult to start out?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Encourage
First call's on us.
Great. So I'll include links to all of that on the show notes if you're listening to this and want to get connected. So that's phenomenal. I want to talk a little bit about church leadership. Obviously, you've been involved with the church world forever. I'm just curious, what trends are you seeing in the church world today, and what advice do you have for church leaders?
Well, Larry Osborne was another one of my, mentors. He's become a friend who wrote Sticky Church, Sticky Teams. He wrote a book years ago about just working with church boards and leadership. He was the first one I ever heard say, probably 15 years now, beware of the shiny new thing. And even though, everybody wants to say we've got the silver bullet, I don't believe there is such a thing. If curriculum was going to solve the world's problems, Lifeway would have done that by now.
Yeah.
We would have saved the world. So everybody's looking for like the new structure, the new system. We need to be organic. We need to be missional. We need to be this or that or the other. The truth is it rises and falls on leadership. I mean, we'll only go as far and grow as expansive as the leadership base. This was true in the book of Acts. There were rumblings of discontent until they got new leaders in the right seats at the right time in Acts 6, and the church, could multiply rapidly again. And I think that's always going to be our great enterprise. And guys sort of forget that. They think it's about, what songs they do, or preaching style, or how many followers they can get on social media, or how many books they can write. I mean, I know guys that are doing all the right things, and those in their ministries are not growing. Because they've not developed a leadership culture, and they don't have a healthy ministry culture, team systems. So I get asked all the time, can you guarantee we're going to grow, if we work with you guys? Well, no, but yes, because if I help you get your culture, if you get healthier and I get your culture healthier and your team in the right seats in the right, and then we make your systems healthier and more effective. Yes, sooner or later, you're going to grow. We can't presume on growth, but we can get prepared for growth. Too many of us, I'm all for the Great Commission, just not at the expense of the Great Commandment. The Great Commandment comes first. It's health, then growth. And sometimes I see ministry leaders get the cart before the horse. So there's really nothing new under the sun. What worked, small groups, that's the new thing. Well, that's Acts chapter 1, 2. Pentecost came in a small group meeting. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. There's nothing new under the sun. So it's about being, focused on what I call the blocking and tackling of leadership, the blocking and tackling of ministry, and working, whatever your plan is, working your plan.
That's good. I had a pastor say this once that I loved, and he said, whenever you see God using someone in a significant way, you should always just ask God, what is it about them that allows them to be used in such a way that they're being used? And I know you're around some of the world's greatest leaders. Are there any attributes or things or patterns that you see in them, the Chris Hodges, yourself, et cetera, that would position people to be used by God in a significant way? I know you talked about getting healthy systems, culture, et cetera, but I'm just curious, as you spend time with the superstars, so to speak, what have you seen heart-wise that we should be aware of?
I would say one thing above all others, and it drives everything we've been talking about: intentionality. All the leaders that I know that are knocking it out of the park, they are extremely intentional. They are focused. They live their lives based upon priorities. They are extremely disciplined. They say no to just about everything and everyone, except the few things that they feel is allowing them to accomplish the vision that God's placed upon their hearts. I got, as of the time of this recording, I got to have a cool little discussion with Craig Groeschel last year. I end up seeing him different places, 2 or 3 times a year. It's weird. He's mentored me from a distance. I haven't hung out with Craig a lot, but I've hung out with him in very small circles on several occasions over the years. And he said to me something last year. He said, Shawn, my number one goal for 2017, this is right before 2017. He said, my number one goal for this year is to initiate way more so than I respond to things and people. And I thought, and I already viewed Craig as one of the most disciplined people I know. His arms are bigger than his head these days, and He starts work every day. He told me this in the last time I saw him, this past November. He starts work every day at 7 a.m. Starts work after his time alone with the Lord, helping out with his 27 children, all of that. He starts work at 7. Then he stops at 4 and goes to the gym, so that he can be home and help out in the afternoons. And I just thought, that's an extremely, extremely disciplined, focused person once again.
I love that. That's a fantastic answer. I'm glad I asked that. It wasn't in the questions. I'll just leave this open-ended before we jump into the lightning round, but young leaders, I know you talked a little bit about networking, but if you could sit down with a room full of 20-somethings, early 30-somethings, what would you tell them?
Yeah, if I was going to give one piece of advice, for young leaders, I would say have what I call a WIT attitude. A WIT attitude. You're probably familiar with this, but it's a whatever it takes attitude. Like I tell young leaders all the time, don't decide like what you want to do for a living. Decide the type of people you want to do it with. Decide the type of culture you want to operate in. Because if it's a fast-growing organization and you plug into it and you're young, you're probably going to be asked to do 27 different things over 10 years if you stay there. So be willing to do anything, everything. I'm not a big fan of spiritual gift inventory tests. I'll tip my hat there in my hand because that's me assessing myself and my giftedness. I don't know if you've watched the early episodes of American Idol. It's coming back this year. But we are not good assessors of ourselves, without some outside perspective. So I think more often we jump in. Somehow they survived in the early church without spiritual gift inventory tests. How did they do it? That they jumped in and they did whatever it took. They picked up a towel and they washed feet and they mopped floors and they served the bread, whatever it took. They led the Bible study. And then when they spoke up in that meeting and they said, Doug Smith, when you share your spiritual story, the room sits on the edge of their seats. And you begin to realize, maybe I'm gifted at communication, versus taking some abstract test that says you have the gift of prophecy. You know what I'm saying? So I would say, roll up your sleeves, be willing to do everything your spiritual authority asks with great passion. And the ones as a leader, the ones I'm always eyeing for executive leadership are the ones who are willing to do whatever it takes to pay the high price of the calling to be part of our organization, that are willing to give up, to go up, that are willing to demonstrate they not only love God and love the vision, but they love me enough to do whatever I ask them to do. And if I believe they love God, love the vision, and love me with all their hearts, I'm going to ask them to go with me for a long time. And so it ends up benefiting them. But I see a lot of leaders, young, sort of disdain being asked to do the lowly things, which is just doesn't even reflect the heart and character of Jesus, who made himself a servant and made himself nothing. And therefore, God exalted him. And I think if we humble ourselves, he'll lift us up in due time. In due time.
That's good. Before we jump into the lightning round again, is there anything that maybe I didn't touch on that you think would be valuable for leaders, or anything else you want to leave leaders with before some fun questions?
Yeah, I would just say for ministry leaders in general, the number one piece of advice I give is never quit on Monday. It always gets better on Tuesday. And the great benefit about having a team around you is you usually don't want to quit on the same day. And most leaders quit right before the harvest. So just be too dumb to quit. I was, and it's paid off so far. I hear it. You hear it. I mean, we all hear. I think the temptations of Christ have the temptation to give up and quit on the mission written all over them. I mean, it's the primary theme. And I think it's one of the major attack strategies of the evil one is to just try to get us to pack up and go home, be quiet, go away, settle for something less, stop dreaming, stop believing, in yourself and in what God's placed upon your heart. So just don't doubt, have faith, not just in God, but in God through you, that you can see this thing through. Just don't quit on it.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to our interview with Shawn Lovejoy. You can find ways to connect with Shawn and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 179. You can also listen to our lightning round interview in episode number 180, and I'd highly encourage you to do that. It's extremely valuable. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe, leave a rating and review, or share this on social media. It really does make a difference, so thank you so much for being a listener. I don't take that for granted. And if you want to stay up to date with everything we're doing here at L3 Leadership, you can simply go to our website at l3leadership.org and sign up for our email list. As always, I like to end with a quote, and I'll quote Craig Groeschel in this one. He said, "It's the things that no one sees that result in the things that everyone wants." I love that. It's the things that no one sees that result in the things that everyone wants. I love that. Thanks for listening and being a part of L3 Leadership. My wife Laura and I appreciate you so much, and we'll talk to you next episode.